Hello, and welcome back to Read Becca. I wanted to talk today about a book that I requested an advance copy of, waited several weeks, thought for sure I didn't get it, and then finally got the exciting news. I did in fact get a copy, and that is The Thick and the Lean by Chana Porter. I absolutely loved The Seep by Porter, and it was one of my favorite books last year. So I kind of knew this author was on my radar to try whatever came out next, and this definitely affirmed my love for Porter's writing. I didn't quite like it as much as The Seep, but it has the same sort of vibe and elements, the same commentary that I loved from The Seep in very different aspects. So where The Seep was a story about identity in a really weird setting, this is likewise a somewhat weird but familiar setting with almost a subversion of that previous topic of identity. We're taking a look at all these ways that socially constructed roles are harmful, and those layers of identity that are built on that can kind of be problematic. So let's dive into our story for The Thick and the Lean. Our two main characters are Beatrice and Riego, and they're both vehicles for exploring different sort of ideas, I think. So for Beatrice, she is this character who, they're both young women. She's a character who is going through having grown up in this very encapsulated religious community of Seagate with a close-knit family, this close-knit religious community. She wants to fit in, and she loves her home and she loves her family, but she doesn't quite fit because she has always really felt drawn to food. And one of the first scenes we get is her first experimentation with food at 14, with cooking at a youth sleepover, basically. And so many of us may recall similar instances of, taboos of being at like evangelical youth groups and experimenting in different ways. And that is played out so well in the beginning of this book, because in this world we have a completely turned on its head idea of evangelical purity culture, where religion is everywhere in this world, and it's become a bit of, it's not a theocracy, but it's influenced the foundation of this world. And in this religion, food is the taboo, and sex is really encouraged and part of their religious practice almost. Whereas food, you don't want to show your teeth, or based on your sort of class and where you are in the world and how you're trying to make known how holy you are, you may not eat solid food anymore. Many of the people that is talked through don't do that. It's all about making a show of how much you do or don't eat. And that's such a huge aspect to this book, because we're talking about these sort of sociocultural constructs of different identity aspects. And so food, or desire of food, is completely stigmatized in this world. So I think that I almost went into this thinking, oh, well, this may be a almost queer norm society because everyone is so accepting sexually. But then as things sort of play out, we see more and more negatives about the pressures and the role that's expected from a sex perspective. They're really encouraged to be sexually engaged. So if someone is less sexually active, or potentially could be asexual, that's really viewed as a negative. And again, there's no real intrinsic reason for that here. So we kind of see the duality of the ways that society and the sociocultural elements to that can really be leveraged against individuals negatively. So I love that spin on the way our culture works in the real world against something completely contrived that is really flipped on its head. So our other character, Riego, is a way of engaging with topics of more race and class. She is an art student who is just getting into university. It's amazing that she has been able to get into this great school, and she's starting there and is having problems with her roommate, who also has some food issues, So that does carry through all of this. But most importantly, she's very lower class, and she's really stigmatized for that in both the class aspect but also food aspects, because her behavior isn't quite fit in with the rest of the people around her. And so she's also sometimes fetishized in certain ways, not as much in the sexual way because sex is such a prominent element throughout all of this, but she's viewed as exotic, I would say. And so that's all really wrapped up in her story. With her being an artist, there's this incredible critique or commentary on the aspect of art from marginalized artists and the ways that people want to force them to express their marginalized identity through their art. And maybe that's not the best thing. So through both of these two character perspectives, we are really going through it with these different sociocultural constructs and ways that people are put into a box of identity in so many different aspects of their lives, and how negative that is. So yeah, I just loved every aspect of that. For the first part of the book is really focused in on those different boxes that the world puts us into, and how turning real world ideas of those sort of stigmas on their head does a great effective job of getting across how human constructed those are, and that they're not real. Like, people have these very deep, painful relationships with these topics because of these socially constructed ideas, that there's not really any true reason for them to be there other than that we've created them. So I love that aspect. As we go on, though, I grew into loving the world building even more and more, because, again, going back to Rieko, you kind of learn initially about the stratified idea of the race and class for this place. And as it goes along, we learn a lot more of that, and it's very naturally integrated into this story. But it is a very literally stratified world with a bottom, middle, and top, basically, and blimp and zeppelin travel as a result. And the upper and lower classes are, again, very, very literalized, but without being jokey or seeming like nonsense. It makes sense to this world that it has shaken out that way, basically. So I really loved that aspect of the world building and how and why it works the way it does. There's a great deal, because there's such a religious aspect. It's not literally, any real world religion, even though I definitely drew clear indications of evangelical similarity to me, just probably because, in part, I come from that background. So there's certainly some inspiration there, but it's completely constructed, and there's a whole mythos to this religion that is built into the world that is so interesting. And I could read a whole book about that whole mythos behind it. So it feels like there's a lot going on in terms of the world building, but we only get as much as we really need. And it does still feel fleshed out and whole, like there is a real world behind this. I think that was just masterfully done by Porter here. And kind of similar to Porter's previous book, The Seep, that one has kind of very weird and very complex world building, but it feels very easy to read. It's a kitchen sink book. It definitely has a lot going on. And same case here. There is so much going on, but I think it stays very coherent despite that action. There really isn't a whole lot. And for me, that's maybe one of the weak points. I do like kind of mundane novels, but as we watch these two young women come of age, grow into adulthood, and settle into lives in different ways, the story does sort of shift. And I don't want to talk anything about what goes on there. There's not a twist or anything that I'm gonna reveal. But as they do sort of settle into that, and things in their lives change from that coming of age perspective, obviously, it did sort of lose momentum for me a little bit in the middle. So I think that's the one weakness that I had for this book, but it's such a minor one. I really was loving the characters. I loved everything that they were exploring about who they were and kind of finding their own way. but it being done in a way that's not really typical of a story like this. I think as well in the meandering and negatives kind of column, there's this book within the book, sort of, The Kitchen Girl. It's again, because it's about food sort of tangentially, it's very rare and taboo, and so that this book becomes of interest over the course of the story, basically. And so there are little snippets of the book actually within this novel, and those chapters, I don't know if they were really strongly additive to the story. I feel like maybe they added to the world building of making it more tangible in a passive way, but it kind of drew me further down that, okay, we're in really wandering territory halfway through the book, that took away from the momentum of the story. So I think I could have taken or left the kitchen girl parts. Other than that, though, that sort of meandering element in the back half of the book, that was the only negative I had about this, really. This was such a great expression of uncovering how these sort of social stigmas really negatively impact us. And I can see why. Like, the roots for how these taboos grew up is very clear, because in the world building we have all of these aspects that are to do with potentially environmental crisis and the different strata of class oppression being a real problem, as well as a corporate issue, where this corporation kind of has all the power in this world. And all of those things come together to really make sense of why the choices have been made about what's right and wrong through this religious lens. But there's still very external pressures and contrived. There's no reason for things to be the way they are. And it is so close to our world that I kind of want to call it a dystopia, because there is this corporate power, this religious oppression element, and there's definitely capitalist commentary there as well. So this has a lot of commentary to it. But through all of the storytelling, it's not dystopian, because it is very true, and in some cases literal examples from the real world, just all sort of mashed together. So everything feels like it's tangible, it's happening in real world scenarios, maybe in different ways, but this feels like very much a commentary on the current moment in time, but it's also something that will carry on and make a lot of sense in commenting on these topics in the future as well. So I think in wrapping this up, overall, I adored this book. It was great. It definitely solidified Chana Porter as an author for me to watch. I will pick up anything that comes out in the future. By way of content warnings, I would say this doesn't have a ton of violence, but it has some sex for sure. It's not very sexy sex. It's kind of just there, but it is there. So that's very much a through line through the book. If you can't handle reading about sex, this is not one to pick up. As well, it's definitely not one to pick up if you have any sensitivity to food issues, eating disorder. That is discussed pretty prominently in sort of all facets of problematic issues with eating. So definitely be on the lookout if you are sensitive to this. This is not one to pick up, probably. So that is it for my discussion of The Thick and the Lean by Chana Porter, definite new auto by author, and I pretty much loved it all. So thank you all so much for watching.